What's up, everybody? This is the Chuck Close video demonstration. We're going to be toggling back and forth between an Illustrator file and a new, probably a good idea to do a 16 by 20 or 20 by 16 Photoshop file, and super important, we got to be 300 pixels per inch. So I am going to do 300 pixels per inch RGB color. We'll just call it the Chuck Close demo. Alright, so what we're going to do is we are going to place our image into the canvas. So I'm going to go to place embedded, and there's a handy dandy photo of myself. I am going to place it on the canvas. Honestly, that size is fine. You can drag it to the edge if you want, but I'm going to press the check to confirm the size change. Now my image is a little bit on the bright side, so I am going to use the adjustment layers down here, and I'm going to ask for brightness and contrast. I am going to boost my contrast because I want pretty distinct shadows. I'm probably going to knock my brightness down just a little bit, and you can see that's helping separate my skin from the background. Alright, so that's a temporary feature. It doesn't permanently change my photo, but it allows me to see what I want to see. Now, I need to get a polar grid or a rectangular grid from Illustrator into Photoshop. Sadly, Photoshop doesn't feature a grid making tool. So I'm going to go over to Adobe Illustrator, alright, and I'm going to click and hold on. For you guys, you'll probably see the line tool first. You want to click and hold on the line. You can choose to make a rectangular grid or a polar grid. I'm going to do a polar grid, so I'm going to click one time in the center of my page, and I'm going to choose a number of concentric dividers. That's how many different circles I'll have. Maybe I'll go 30, and then radial dividers 32. Maybe you'll skew them a little bit towards the bottom. I've never actually messed with this slider before. I'm going to make it -70 toward the bottom, so that means we'll have more sliders. Let's see what happens. We don't need to fill the grid, and when it comes in, oh, that's pretty strange looking. Yeah, alright, so that's definitely not what we want. When I look at this, it's all kinds of messed up. I put the dividers skewing on the radial dividers. Well, I don't want that at all. I actually don't want any skewing on the radial dividers, but on the concentric dividers, I may want to skew them closer to the center. So let's see what that looks like if I do -70 on concentric dividers. That still might be too crazily skewed. Let me zoom in and see. Oh my god. Yeah, that's still probably too much. So we'll do one more. And you can always just leave that setting well enough alone. I'm doing a 1000 point. The default size I think is 100 point, but yeah, let's see. We'll maybe just skew a little bit more toward the end, maybe -13%. Alright, cool. So that just packs a few more concentric dividers here in the beginning. I can live with that. Now, yours is going to come in, it's probably going to be 1 point stroke weight. That's fine for the outer sections, but when you get down, it's really muddy and clouded. So what we want to do is make sure that our whole grid is using like the lightest stroke amount available. In fact, I may go ahead and do 0.125. Let's see, can it do that? It can. So I am going to now go to Edit Copy. I've got a polar grid that I can live with. I need to paste it into my Photoshop document. So we'll toggle over. I'm going to hit Alt and Tab to go over to the Chuck Close demo. And I'm going to do Edit, Paste. Now when I paste it, I'm just going to paste it in not as a smart object, but as pixels. Although you can do a smart object, I would make sure if you choose smart object, you don't want to add it to your libraries. The libraries are something that is cloud-based, and we're actually in the public school system. We're not really connected to the cloud features of the Creative Suite in Photoshop, so it really just causes unnecessary crashing. So I'll click OK, and I'm going to resize. I want to resize this so that the concentric circles, I think it looks coolest if it like radiates from one of my eyes. I don't know which one I'm going to focus on. Maybe the eye that's further back. And I'll just make my grid larger. Keep holding Shift. Right. So let's hit the Enter key. Alright, now I'm going to zoom in and let's see what we're dealing with. Woo! Alright. there's so much going on in here. I may have packed it too tightly. I may have just far too many divisions to demonstrate, certainly. But we'll roll with it and see how it goes. All right. So my image is at 300 pixels per inch. That's really important because if you bring in a grid and it looks fuzzy or pixelated, chances are you're still at 72 pixels per inch. Now I'm at like 800% here, but when you zoom out, it looks pretty small. Now, I'm going to go back over to Illustrator one more time, and I'm going to ask for a grid. But this time I'm not going to skew it in any way, shape, or form. Maybe I'll reduce the number of concentric dividers. I'll try 25. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, knock it down to the small stroke weight. We'll do copy, back over to Photoshop, Alt-Tab. Cool. We'll paste this one as Smart Object. All right, scale it up. There's not like a right or wrong answer. You could choose pixels, it would be fine, but I'll leave that as it is. I think I'm going to be happier with this only because, let me uncheck Auto Select Layer. I want to move my grid over to my eye. And then if I zoom in on my eye, I've got larger little pie sections here to work with. Because you could really go blind painting Chuck Close style. In fact, I think in one of the documentaries he talks about how all the really fine detail might have messed with his vision over the years, so let's not do that to ourselves. All right, I'm going to now zoom back out. I've got the grid in place. Press Control T to do a little more transformation. Maybe I'll scale it up just a little more. All right, cool. Now, once I've got my grid in place, all right, I'm going to zoom in, make sure it's centered on the eye. Cool. All right, use my move tool just a little bit. Lovely. All right, I am ready to rock with this thing. I want to lock my grid. So I've got my vector smart object layer. I'll rename it grid. All right, I'll lock that. I've got the old one that I brought in that I'm not going to use. I'll trash that. I have my brightness contrast filter now. I preemptively, I think, have a white background. I just find that's easier because I'm going to have to use selection tools to select these grids to paint in them. But I don't want to paint either on my image, so I'm going to lock it, or on my grid. I want to paint on a whole new layer, so I'm making a new layer, and I'm going to name it Paint in all caps. I don't know why all caps, but I mean, you can paint it, name it Paint, whatever you want to do. Now I'm going to hit the brush tool. Now for the brush tool, the keyboard shortcut is B. All right. There's a couple of other shortcuts that we're going to use, and rather than use the eyedropper tool and press the letter I, although you could do it, if I want to paint something but I want to capture the value from the photograph, I can hold the Alt key with my brush tool, and it will temporarily give me the eyedropper, which is great. So if I want to know what this color is over this part of the photo, I click on it, and it grabs it and puts it in the color bar. All right, so in the little color picker, it grabbed it. Now, looking at it, the eyedropper tool is currently set to do something called a point sample. I'm a little more of a fan of a 3x3 or 5x5 average because we're going to be taking these sections of face and kind of reducing them a little bit. So, if I were to sample this darker section of my nose, it's giving me kind of a dark burgundy tone. It's got a little white and black mixed with the reddish orange hue. That's great. If I were on point sample, I might grab a random pixel. You see it jumps around a bit more, so you can tell it to average like the nearest 5 pixels, and then that's cool. All right, so if I hit B for brush and then hold Alt, I get my eyedropper. So I'm going to be able to sample different areas, but I want to paint one section at a time. You might think, Mr. Hatchell, that is crazy. I will never be able to remember how to do that, but I'm going to teach you an easy shortcut. If we hide our photo and activate the magic wand tool, it's under quick selection. The keyboard shortcuts you'll remember for this are W for the magic wand. I'm going to select this section. All right. Activate my photo again. B for brush, automatically changes me to the brush. Alt for sample. So I'll sample that. I'm going to paint that on that section. I will sample again, holding Alt. All right, I see kind of a triangular shape. Do one little stripe here, sample there, and then sample this highlight. So I've basically divided that section into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. That's more than most sections will have. Some of your sections will be large swaths of skin where you may only have 2 values. In point of fact, if I hide the photo, press W for my wand and click on this section, reactivate the photo, B for brush, Alt to sample. I'm going to sample that, and if I squint my eyes and I see one area that's a little bit darker, that sometimes helps. I can see it looks a little dark up in this corner, and there's a swath of it there, but for the most part, it's all the same value. Alright, so it's mostly the same value of skin tone throughout. Alright, so when I hide the photo, you can see we've activated that. Alright, I can use my Alt key, sample that color, go ahead and get that back down in there. So I've got the general value of light and dark that was happening in that section. Alright, you are welcome to go through on your paint layer and paint each section just with the skin tones, but the fun thing about Chuck Close is he experiments with the hue, but tries to keep the value of these areas more or less the same. So what does that look like in practice? So if we want to start adding some funky colors in this section, one way to do it is to go freehand. So if I use the Alt key and I sample the skin tone that I averaged out, right now it's kind of a reddish orange. I can see that from my color bar. Alright, but I can slide the hue or spectrum bar up and down. I could do, as long as I don't move or click anywhere in here, I can move up and down the spectrum bar, and I can paint new hues in this without changing the overall value of light and dark, which is kind of fun. So what I'm going to do is do a couple of concentric colors. Maybe I'll do like maybe some dots here, shrink my brush down, maybe I'll make a little smiley face guy. Alright, so we got a sideways smiley face guy. Alright, I can do the same thing over on this side. Okay, because again, the value of light and dark doesn't matter too much when I click on the various sections here. Alright, it's still going to read as roughly the same value. Now, for the darker section, I will resample that. Okay, now I can grab a similarly dark value and reapply that. You can see it's a little more muted. Okay, play around with that, and if I'm happy, I'm happy. I can move on to the next section. So that's the basic premise behind this. I'm going to press W to get my magic wand tool, hide my picture, go ahead and select the next section up, and then turn my picture back on. Now I got to subdivide it. B for brush, Alt to sample. All right, I got a dark corner up here. I'm going to paint that whole thing kind of dark. I got a little swath here. I'm going to sample that. I'm going to paint this next whole section with that value. And then finally add this third value. Go ahead and paint that in. You know, the larger brushes you use, I'm using my bracket keys up near backspace to resize. That's always a good one to do. So now I've divided this into 1, 2, 3 values. All right, I can play with my hue. Maybe I want to have a little swath of green. Go back to a little purple. I'll shrink it down, do some purple stripes. Since my initial has a letter A in it, maybe I'll do like an A, and a little A below the A. I'm just kind of goofing around here, do some dotted lines, whatever I want really, just to mix it up, to make it a little less plain. Now, I've done that with the skin tone. I've got a bit of a shadow here. I'll sample the shadow again. All right. It does help sometimes if you try to follow the contours of what was happening in the shape of what you're painting. You know, if I have something that's kind of going diagonally, I can help reinforce that by painting diagonal stripes or what have you. Alright, so let's hide that and see what we got. Looking kind of cool. Alright, it looks like I missed a spot here when I initially did my painting, so I'll just upscale that. Nice. Still more or less the same. If I don't like it, hit undo, do another pass. Alright, so go ahead and do some dotted lines. Nice. Alright, now one of the other things that you can do, I'm going to press W, select another section. You can freestyle a little bit. If you trust yourself to mix brighter and darker colors in order to get the overall balance of a tone, that's fine, but I would caution you against moving this around too much in the beginning. because sometimes if you go too crazy and start adding a lot of pure hues, it no longer has a lot of relation to what was happening in the photo. And ultimately, we are looking to recreate something that looks like us, but is heavily abstracted in the style of Chuck Close. So B for brush. I'm still on my paint layer because all my other layers are locked. Alt key. All right, I'll sample that dark area. All right, the next thing, sample that. The next area, I see it's a little bit darker here. All right, a little darker there. And then I've got a light section over on this side. Cool. All right, so I'm just filling in the gaps, sample whatever's nearby. Oops. There we go, sample that. Cool. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things. I don't have to mix them all up, but I do like to play with that. So I'll go ahead and do some adjustments. Alt key to sample it. Maybe we'll go purple this time. Alt key to sample it. Go with a little blue. Alt key to sample it. Maybe I want to go yellow. I'll switch it up and do a little blue. Blue dots. And some pink. Magenta or red, whatever kind of tone is leading the day. And for the dark area, I always like to mix it up too. Cool. All right. Done. Moving on. W for the next section. Activate the photo. All right. This one's a little more simple. I only really see 2 different values. So I'm going to B for brush. Scale it up. Yep. I'm going to hold the Alt key down. I'm going to sample this dark side. Put dark side roughly on that. Alt key, sample the light side over here. And you can see those lines, they don't match up perfectly, but they're pretty doggone close. So what I'm going to be able to do, I'll go over here, add a little blue, maybe reduce my brush size, add a little stripe of purple. All right, now I'm going to sample the darker section. Maybe I want to go greens on this side. I could do kind of a loose blobby shape that doesn't quite go to the edge. You're welcome to paint to the edge because that's why we have the selections. But I could also kind of paint freehand. I could do another blobby inside the blobby, shrink it down, switch it up, go with a warmer color, do a blobby inside the blobby's blobby, and then that's probably enough. Control D to deselect. Let me hide the photo. You can see we're making headway. Now, one of the things that we may choose to do after it's all said and done, we've added our funky little interpretations of the values of light and dark onto the paint layer. We could always choose to boost our brightness and contrast for our colors. You can see the relationships between the colors will still more or less be the same. The dark areas are dark, the light areas are light. All right, so that's something that we'll be able to play with after we paint in the values according to the photograph. All right, so go ahead and hit Control S to save because I've been playing with fire, haven't done any saving yet. Demo, yep, 1819, demo A. Just tack an A on the end. Cool. So I'm going to stop this video here, and then I will come back and tack on the second video that shows you a much further along progress and also talks to you a little bit about using selection tools to reduce what's going on in your different radial grid shapes. So hide my photo, W, select, activate photo, brush, paint layer, Alt. You really will establish a rhythm as you do this. Right? Half of it's that, half of it's that. Cool. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do, I said I was going to show you another video. I can probably show it to you really quickly. If I press W and then I click on one of these sections, oh, that wasn't quite choosy enough. Let's try this. Let's hide the photo. All right, we'll even hide our paint. I want to get this grid back. Good. Now on the paint layer, I want to subtract that. Come on. Ooh, it was just a little too picky. Let me take my magic wand. 32 as a tolerance. I could be a little more exclusive, so 5. There we go. What I was hoping to do is just activate this one little area because I can modify that selection. If I tell it to modify and smooth out, maybe 25 pixels, it's going to round itself off in kind of an interesting way. All right, so I could go ahead and paint with my brush, maybe around the edges of that. And then I could do modify contract. Maybe I'll contract at 30 pixels. And remember my values, ooh, that was too much. My values that I'm putting in here when I tell it to contract, they're kind of best guesses. If I contract at 10 pixels, maybe that'll be more, yeah, that's better. All right, so it reduces it a little bit, and we're getting kind of a concentrically smooth shape here. I will do modify, contract, 15 pixels. Good. And maybe I'll also do modify smooth, 25. Holy moly, that's basically just round again. All right, so I'll paint that in. Cool. Deselect it. And so now I've got a more interesting thing going on rather than painting freehand. Again, you don't have to do that, but it's something fun that you can do. If you just use the magic wand tool and it's set to sample all layers, doesn't matter what layer you're on, even a hidden layer, I can then select that grid, and then I'm going to go B for brush, resample that area, shrink it down, my bracket key, cool. I'm going to mix it up, maybe go with a little blue, maybe go with a little green, alright, go with a little magenta, paint a stripe, a little red, put some polka dots anywhere you want. Alright, so it's just kind of mixing up the values. Alright, one of the things that you guys can do, if you get this far and you're feeling confident, what you can play around with is the concept of kind of remixing the colors on your own. You don't have to rely just on the sample, because frankly skin tones are going to tend to skew towards, you know, earth tones like, you know, pinks and browns and things like that. So you don't have to stick with that. You could really blow the color out. You could preemptively take your photo and you could do a hue saturation adjustment layer, and you could really hyper saturate your image. You could, let me zoom out so you can kind of see what's going on there. Of course, now what I painted before doesn't really work, but I have boosted the saturation on the color. I could also play with the hue. I could shift it in all these different directions. Because what's going to happen is, no matter what the image looks like, the shadows are still the shadows, the highlights are still the highlights. So as long as you're faithful to painting in the areas of light and dark, you're going to be able to kind of goof around and play with the content of these grid shapes fairly quickly. Now, another thing that you can consider playing with, because in the smaller sections, it takes a long time to paint. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. It takes a long time to paint these tiny sections. The larger ones go a little more quickly. All right. So what you could choose to do is you could choose to, on the paint layer, if I know that I need a fairly bright area to paint across all 4 of these, I'm going to go ahead and B for brush. Okay. I'll boost up the size of my brush because I'm going to try to paint this highlight all together. So I'll paint this highlight across all 4 layers. I'll paint the dark hair across those different sections, right? So I know that's going to be dark. I'll paint this area in here. Paint this area in here. All right, get that highlight. So I'm kind of painting large sections all at once. Then I can kind of go back and retroactively on my grid layer, I'll put the grid layer on top, I can hide my photo and paint layers. Oop, what happened? My photo didn't go all the way. I think if I zoom out it'll work again. Let's see. Paint. Photo. Oh, I better save. It looks like it's about to crash. But I can activate my grid with the magic wand tool. If I want to mess with this section, I can then turn on the paint and then zoom into just that section. And then I can start freestyling on the values that I have. Alright, so I'm on the paint layer. Got to be on the paint layer to use your brush. Alright, brush tool, Alt key. Alright, we're sampling it. Here's where you can freestyle. If you want to make sure that it's dark, you could slap it onto black and throw a stripe of black on there, and then slap it onto like a bright green and throw a smaller pass of these bright values. As long as you come back down to earth and kind of resample. Let me go ahead and use the Alt key again. I'll resample the original dark tone. Let me just shift the hue a little bit. So we're balancing this really bright and really dark that didn't appear in the photo, just so that overall it reads as a darker section. Same thing with this really bright section. It reads as almost pure white, just barely off-white. I could choose to use like a really strong yellow in here and do a couple of dots. What I would want to do is come back and maybe use some more muted tones from a different color, maybe even a complementary color here. All right, so they're kind of opposites. They'll cancel each other out, especially the fact that they are lighter. All right, they're a little bit off-white. So when I zoom out, that area is still going to read as a stripe of fairly light highlight. Come on, zoom in. All right. So that's something you can play around with too if you're feeling comfortable. You're welcome to keep going and just doing the same technique with the earth tones and then throwing some high contrast on it later. All right. You can also play with, let's see, we need to paint below that. Yep, there we go. So I mean, you could always do that later. You can always go back to your paint layer and boost the hue saturation. You can slam the saturation bar way up. Okay, looks like there is a mask. Let's delete the mask. There you go. So you can see your saturation could be boosted after the fact, after you've been faithful to the values, the areas of light and dark. All right, I've gone on enough. I want to leave you guys to it so that you can get it together and save early and save often, because you, like I, if you don't, will be prone to a crash. Let me hit save. Good, that's saving that, and then I will try to keep cranking this thing out and then show you more of the finished product later. And that's all for now.